leave at 5:30 this evening. I want to make sure that we get a chance to talk about the vacancy, the filling of the vacancy process. So I'm going to move that up to our first. Well, let's first do the meeting follow-up and then make that our second item. Anything about last Tuesday that we need to wrap up? Loose ends or comments about how the meeting went?
Mr. Mayor, if you don't mind, I'll use this as kind of a segue into my comment here. As you recall, we are trying to gain your ability to attend the Masterson Place ribbon cutting next week. Well, soon, a couple of weeks. And one of the things that I want you to be aware of with regard to one of the statements that was made in the meeting last week was that indeed we had used 1 cent money to fund the old Masterson Place, the one that's effectively a hotel now. And the reality is that's not the case. The Masterson funds that council set aside from 1% were actually dedicated to this facility and not the hotel facility that you were told about last time. So I just wanted you to be aware of that, kind of a follow-up item, because I don't think I'd sent you an email on that particular point that was made. And then the only other thing, Mr. Mayor, that I wanted to cover, or that I wanted to ask you about, was the USO donation and
Yes,
stuff.
thanks for doing that. Did you all see in your packet that we had a request from Mr. Steensland about the USO show in August? And the ask is for us to come up with $3,000 to help put this on, and honoring the Korean War vets, particularly like that.
Right. Correct.
So, and so there are some ways that we could find $3,000. My suggestion would be if council wants to provide this support, if you look at our sales tax revenue curve, we are anticipating a modest not profit, receipts that will be in excess of what our budget has as spending, and so we would easily have $3,000 in our general fund at the end of the fiscal year that we could spend to help this cause, if you all want to do that. So any opinions about whether we should do that? It missed the community promotions process, which would be appropriate next time around, but how do you all feel about funding this? Did you get a chance to look at it in the packet?
Okay.
Comments? Steve?
Well, I will make a comment on it. I mean, it obviously missed community promotions, but we kicked the door open for this. You're kicking the door open for anybody to come in and ask for it.
It's true. Making sure everyone's okay before we move forward, because it does create a precedent.
Is it an annual event, or was this maybe something that got planned like last minute?
I'm pretty sure this is annual.
Okay.
isn't it?
No, I just wasn't sure.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, I think that's at least a hope that it be a
Okay.
routine if it's not already. Yeah.
Okay.
So Steve is right. Every time you make those decisions, someone will bring it up later. So it's obviously a worthwhile cause. Any other opinions on whether we should do this?
I support it. I just want to make sure that we're not backing ourselves into a corner.
Yeah.
We just have to be super careful, and I do agree with Steve. We just have to be super careful. I know we've talked about it in the past in several different inertias of our council that we set a precedent. We've got to follow through. So that's my.
At some point, we have to say yes or no. So, any other opinions?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, that would probably be my recommendation if you're looking for one, that indeed funneling these kinds of requests through community promotions is a real good answer. And that way you don't have to, worry about telling one group yes and another group no based on less than structural reasons, if you will, for what that's worth.
Or in the future, we could set aside some money for community promotions that's unallocated for situations like this as they come up, but we didn't do that.
Yeah, and I feel like that kind of becomes a race. I mean, as far as, you know, say somebody 2 months from now is like, oh, well, I came up with an idea outside of community promotions, but just simply because of timing, they beat me to those excess funds. I think we definitely wanna keep it within,
Yeah. But there are times when things come up without,
It seems that, thank you, Mr. Mayor, it seems at time we have done that out of some council goals funding. And I don't know if we had much money in council goals this year. We have done that.
I don't think we put that line item in the budget at all, did we?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, that might have been a vehicle of the past in terms of having funds available. And I would say it probably is not an option at this point in time. There's no funding in there, basically.
Thank you.
Okay, let's just do, given those concerns, a thumbs up for $3,000 for the USO. Would you agree that we could call that an expenditure that would be available to us after the fiscal year is completed and we look at the general fund balance?
Sure.
Thumbs up?
sorry, I was.
Okay, well, we tell them that next year they will have an opportunity to use community promotions. I suspect they'll get a positive response to that. Okay. Okay, let's talk about the,
Oh, it's coming.
the vacancy, created by Councilman Walsh's resignation. I think everyone understands the circumstances. He sent us an email explaining the circumstances. All I have done is talked about how it's been done in the past, and several of you have been through this. What we have done in the past is we've set a time for applications to be submitted, a deadline, and people have sent their letters and their resumes in, and then packets have been given to council members, and we've set aside a special meeting where the candidates would come before council and basically respond to a set group of questions. In public. And then we would retire to an executive session, and based on what we heard and based on our review of their information and their track records and their vitas, we would make a decision. That doesn't mean we have to do it that way, that's just how we've done it before. So there are no rules that we must follow as far as replacing, other than choosing someone who lives in Ward 3. So any opinions on how we should go about this? Ken?
I don't have an opinion, I'm just wondering, is there any way for the city website, once the candidates put in that they're interested, to allow the citizens of Ward 3 or all of Casper, however, but Ward 3 to vote who they would prefer, but then it comes down to our decision, and I know that, but is there any way to allow the citizens of Ward 3 to have a say?
We've tried that, Sean.
The only issue I would see with that is that anybody could access that website from
Correct.
China if they wanted to, you know, and vote. It would be,
Or a
it would be
robot,
open
yeah.
to the entire world. That would be my concern about that, because you don't know who's voting and.
Well, you're not really suggesting a vote so much as just input, correct?
Input.
Right, just, I think, I just feel very strongly that Ward 3 should have a vote or an input or something that is obtained by, that would go into our packet so we can see what they're saying, how they feel, so we can take that into consideration as well. I don't know how, I'm not technologically smart, but I strongly feel, I think it'd be good to have their opinion.
I can say that we did receive group emails supporting one candidate or another in the past, where people have basically done just what you're saying, is express support for someone. I think Mike and then Kristen.
Mr. Mayor, I appreciate what Councilman Bates is saying. I think we need to be extremely careful about using the word vote, because that's a big word. I think that asking for input from citizens is certainly an absolutely good idea. You know, reading the newspaper this morning, it occurred to me that perhaps we could get former Councilman Dennis Laird to move to the east end of town.
Dallas.
But, no, Dennis.
Oh.
Yeah, Dallas must have a secret brother.
Did you say have him move to the east side?
Yeah, we can talk him into it, but.
We'll talk later, Mr.
No, but, though, you know, having, gone through that process, you know, a little over a year ago, I really thought it was a pretty good process, not because you guys foolishly chose me, but, it just seemed to me to be a pretty, you know, pretty orderly process and everything, and I don't know if, those of you who have suffered through it on the other side, have the same feeling, but, you know, that seemed to me like a pretty good process.
Kristen?
I agree. I think we need to be careful when we're saying vote, especially, I mean, what if somebody doesn't have access to a computer? I mean, I understand they could go to the library, but what if they're not at the place where they could go to the library? I just wouldn't want that to turn into an unfair type of thing or get extremely skewed, which is probably quite easy at the end of the day. But I guess my point would be, that's why all of us are here. We are essentially the citizens' liaisons. If they have a specific opinion about who they would like to see in that seat, that's our purpose, for them to reach out to us and us to represent them.
Right?
Yeah, having been a part of the process several times, it's worked as far as pretty seamlessly, and it's I think it's very fair, and you do receive a lot of feedback from a lot of constituents and citizens that want to, and I think we can. Maybe the only thing I think is doing just a better job of getting the word out as best we can,
Yep.
and just saying, hey, contact your local council member to, you know, or your ward council member to talk about, you know, who you think would be great and whatever, et cetera, et cetera. But other than that, I do agree with what Kristen said. You know, we're the liaison to that, to go out there and represent them on the council for it, and then they will have to run for re-election. Year and a half or 2 years?
Next general election.
Next general election,
Oh,
so
okay.
it'll be coming up anyway.
State law requires that.
So the state law will have to happen in the next general election anyway.
Yeah.
So it'll
It's really
be-
an appointment for 1 year.
Yeah. So it'll be, the referendum will be made in a year anyway, about who they want anyhow, so.
Well, we could certainly put out a press release soliciting the applications, setting a deadline, and asking members of the public to express their opinions once the names are out.
Right.
Would you be okay with that?
Yeah, because I mean, like when Councilman Huber won, I had no idea. Now I'm in Ward 2, so of course, you know, but I don't remember hearing much about his. I don't remember much about it even when Dallas Laird and I ran for the first time, hearing a lot. And so I think a lot in that aspect what is missed, and I just want to make sure that we give as many of Ward 3 the opportunity to whoever the candidates are to express who they prefer. So, yeah.
Bob?
Charlie, with all that in mind, I think that's a fair process. We did receive a number of emails every time we've done it. I might recommend that they all come to the city manager's office and not be distributed individually, if they would. But, you know, if we look at the time frame, we still need to have 9 members as often as we can. So if we, for example, said next Friday, let's see, today's the 9th, if you say the 19th, they have to be in by the 19th, that would give us an opportunity to have a pre-meeting so we could take official action on the 23rd.
Any opinions about the agenda? I think that's a little fast
Yeah.
myself.
What are we all asking for on the application? Sorry, you probably stated that night.
Well, basically an expression of interest is all it takes.
Okay, so it's not like, I mean, they need weeks and weeks to like compile like an essay or things like that. Like they literally just need to fill out an application saying me.
Normally, they just give us a letter of interest and they'll attach a resume or something along those lines
Yeah.
to it and then explain why they want to work, when they want the CPC, but I don't know if there's an official form, like traditional employment application.
Yeah.
Well, what we have done though is we've asked them
Right.
to respond to a set group of questions.
Okay, I gotcha.
And we can redesign those. In fact, could you guys could hunt those down and maybe you
betcha.
guys could talk about them in the pre-meeting and see if everyone's okay with that group of questions or if they want to change that. The one thing that we have to be careful about is, and Mr. Henley, you may want to comment on this, but my understanding is we can't really ad-lib the questioning process. Meaning there's a set group of questions that each candidate answers.
Fair
There's
process.
no follow-up questions, there's no additional questions to any individual candidates, because that creates a perception of unfairness, or basically somebody gets a chance to talk longer than someone else, or explain a position on something that the other person didn't. So we want to be standardized in my questioning. Is that correct, Mr. Henley?
Mayor, Council, I think that's probably a good procedure, at least to strive for. A couple of reasons. No one here, I suspect, maybe a couple of you are engaged with human resource work, and you always have then the concern about maybe asking a question that would be unlawful under federal law or something along those lines. So having the questions pre-printed, at least in mind, everyone on board, so that you all have your input as to what questions should be answered, makes good sense. And I think that way also there is not a perception that we gave an easy question to this person and a hard question to that person, that type of thing. So I think it's a good thought process. I think that's the way it's been done in the past. I think most people who have participated felt that the process was fair.
So we'll look through those questions in the pre-meeting next week, and then you guys can decide if you want to make any changes to those. We should get the agenda done tonight, though. You're right, Bob. And so, personally, I think another week. But I don't. Any other opinions?
Well, it's gotta be the then or the 6th, because we won't have a meeting on the 30th, right?
Right.
Right.
Yeah, so it's either the 23rd or the 6th to do official action, unless we want to do a special meeting. And I personally wouldn't want to spend the money for that.
Unless it's on a work session.
So tell me again, your suggestion is that the deadline for submission of an application would be the 19th?
Well, that's, yeah, just for ducks, yeah.
And then we would have the interview process on the 26th or 23rd?
23rd. And if we don't do it then we still have to take official action at the next regular meeting, which will be the 6th.
See, personally, I don't think we ever did this where we tried to do the interviews in conjunction with a full work session.
Oh, yeah, we could do the interviews work session.
Oh, you mean it was
But
a
then it's
special
gotta be
meeting?
a-
It was a special meeting for
Okay.
the
Both of them.
If you have 12 candidates and you
Yeah.
have each one, go through the questions, you're talking about a lengthy process, and we already have a full agenda on the 23rd.
That's true, yeah, you're right.
Okay.
So, my opinion is it
Yeah,
should
you're
be a
right.
special meeting to make sure we have enough time. Plus, we have to adjourn to executive session, and those of you who've been through this before know that that can be a lengthy process because these are tough decisions to make. You have these highly qualified people you're trying to make decisions about. And it's a big decision.
So the 6th is probably our best target to install, so to speak.
Yes, and maybe a special
I
meeting.
concur.
Maybe we should set that now. What would work for everyone? If we,
Can we still do the 19th as the application deadline?
do you think that's enough time for people to sort this out and decide if, Ken?
I think as far as application, I think around the 22nd through the 26th, because we're just now letting people know that that's, it's been publicized, but my real big thing is once the candidates' names are mentioned who are interested, we give enough time for, as I said, Ward 3 to be able to voice their concern that it's not bam, bam, okay, we got a new council person, and it's like, I thought you guys were gonna let us say something, so I just wanna make sure I know that we need to hurry up, but I don't want, once their names are out there, I wanna make sure Ward 3 has a chance, long enough chance to state who they prefer.
I just don't wanna run into September being the time that we
Me too.
install this person, so. I don't know. I think the 19th is reasonable.
I think it's
Do you think 10 days is enough for people to decide? Okay.
Yeah,
If that's the
I think
majority,
so.
let's just go with that.
yeah, so application deadline will be the 19th.
5 o'clock, city
Yeah.
managerville.
And then we'll, look
Yeah,
at,
we set interview.
making a decision, interviewing them and making a decision at the August 6th.
Well,
regular
we gotta
council.
set a regular, a special meeting for the interview.
What we've done in the past is we've done the interviews and the selection the same night. And so, and personally, I don't see how we can do that on an already scheduled meeting night.
I agree.
So we need to set another date.
Well, perhaps we should set
The 30th,
a
yeah,
special meeting on the 30th.
that would work.
Oh, cause, yeah.
We don't have a
Sorry,
meeting.
that took me a second. I was like, that's a Tuesday, you guys.
Yeah. I may be gone that night.
Could we do that?
I think I'm gone that night.
What about Wednesday the 31st? Are you gonna be around on the
Or the,
31st?
we can even move it up to the 22nd.
Well, I don't know the rest of your schedule. Anytime the 26th, the 22nd to the 26th would work for
Yep.
me.
Yeah.
Most of those nights work for me as well.
No, it's,
Except for Tuesday.
That week actually works better for me too,
the
Charlie.
24th or the 26th, I won't be here.
How about the 25th? Thursday the 25th.
25th, we just got a thing about Masterson Place. for
That's
open house.
just a ribbon cutting at 3:30.
5:30.
Well, 3:30 to 5:30. Is that the?
5:30 to 7:30 is what's on
yeah,
the
is that what-
slip.
Oh, I
Yeah.
had the wrong time. Oh, okay.
I won't make it this Thursday.
Or we could just
No.
tell Councilman Walsh we don't accept his resignation then.
How about Monday the 22nd?
I can do that.
Yes, I can do that.
It's
Well,
pretty short.
The only problem
Oh,
is.
then Ken doesn't get his input, yeah.
Yeah.
Or
Okay.
none of us get the input.
And
but,
29th, 30th, 31st, I'll be gone.
You'll be gone, huh?
Stop taking
Oh,
trips,
it's,
guys.
and you know, this is the sort of thing where it's
Right.
really important for all 9 of us to be, or all 8 of us to be if possible, so.
But what about the August 1st?
I'll be gone.
I won't be.
Oh,
I have to do it Monday, Tuesday. Depending on the weekend.
What about August 5th?
yeah.
We may have to end up going back to.
Well, we can celebrate.
We'll bring a birthday cake.
But yeah, if we did August 5th, you could officially
I wanna
make it official on the 6th.
Well, that's true.
Yeah?
There's really no advantage to going earlier
Mhm.
as long as you're gonna do the installation on the 6th anyway.
I could do August 5th.
Monday the 5th. 4:30, going once, going twice. Is that okay? That'll work, Carter?
Absolutely, you betcha.
So,
4:30 work for everybody?
Yep.
so the
All right.
19th applications have to be in by, in a sense, 5,
Mhm.
and then on the 5th is the interview process.
Now, the other, yes, and then, now the other complication is, we have no idea how many people will come forward. We've had as many as 14, and I guess we'll talk, later about the number. And, I mean, if we got 25, or, you know, then it gets more difficult to manage, in
10 minutes.
one meeting on the 5th, but we'll know by the 19th where we sit.
Well, if I may, I think the last time we had, it was not a great number of questions, and I think we had allocated 10 minutes ahead.
I thought we did 5. Can't remember.
Yeah, it was 5.
I think we only get 5
Was it
minutes.
5?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You get
So-
5 minutes.
And many times people were done before that.
Well, I
So-
wasn't.
You're a lawyer now.
No comment. All right, so we're all set, 4:30 on the 5th, with deadline on the 19th, so we can put a press release out tomorrow,
You bet.
seeking the applicants. And then on the 19th, well, the 19th is that a Friday, is that right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Then maybe Monday the 22nd, we can put out a press release with the names, and then seek public comment, and then announce that the interviews will take place on the 5th. You all good with that? Okay.
Sorry, just one more question. The questions that we were gonna talk about at the pre-meeting next week, those are kept quote-unquote under wraps until the interviews,
No.
correct?
Yep.
Okay,
No.
so we'll just make those public once we determine them next Tuesday. Okay,
Yeah, give people a chance to think about what
Yep.
they wanna say and be prepared, make their case.
okay.
Okay, anything else on the selection process? we all appreciate Chris Walsh's service and his commitment to the city, and we will miss his input. Okay. Let's go on to parade permit revisions. You want to start us, Gardner?
You betcha, you betcha. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Council has entertained some dialogue recently with regard to the revisions proposed through the special events guide in comparison to language in the ordinances as it relates to parades and parade permits and those kinds of things. I believe the question council had was whether or not the activities that the events guide anticipates in correlation with the ordinances are lawful and appropriate and so on. And so the city attorney has taken some time to give that question some thought, analysis, and with your permission, I'd be happy to defer to the attorney to kind of walk us through that discussion.
Mr. Henley?
Thank you. Mayor, council, had a couple of changes here, and with changes, particularly, I think if you're used to doing something in one way, and you have some changes and you have to do something different, you're going to have more questions and concerns about that. And I suspect that's really what happened here with respect to the motorcycle group. They've been doing something in one way for a long number of years. But we've had a lot of changes, from a new city manager to a new police chief, to a new city attorney, to a new fire chief. And then add on top of that, even though it had been worked on for since 2016, 2017, early, at the latest, we had a new special events policy and guide come out at the end of 2018. So this would have been the first year that would have been used. And so we then have our new police chief receiving this application for a parade permit, and he's looking at the ordinances and goes through those. And if you look at a lot of the things that were concerning to the motorcycle group, that were things that were addressed, are addressed in the current ordinance, were addressed in the ordinance in the past. But I think the prior administrations were a lot more hands-off than the current administration with respect to this particular task that they were saddled with. And in addition, the new police chief felt that the new resolution needed to be honored, and so he involved then the city clerk's office and received input from a variety of divisions here within the city. And based upon that, they went through the process that they anticipated with the special events guide, and the permit was in fact issued with some modifications based upon some of the concerns that the police department had, and the ride in fact occurred. So, you know, the question really becomes, do we have some contradictions within the ordinance and within the special events guide that are just irreconcilable, or in fact, do we have basically a workable process? If you look at what ordinances are designed to do, it's basically your way to enact legislation. So this is how you legislate. And I think of ordinances typically, because of my background, you know, if you violate an ordinance, it's something that you can be charged with in front of municipal court. That's, of course, not always the case. We have zoning ordinances, and it's a matter of regulation, but it's kind of the ongoing regulation of the matters of the city. On the other hand, you see in your packets on a weekly basis lots and lots of resolutions where you're addressing specific acts for a specific event, a specific time frame, a specific question, a specific fiscal year, and that's the way those are usually adopted. So here we had an ordinance, the council adopted a resolution which looked at specific information with respect to specific events, and that's what happened here. And so, in looking at all of that, it seems as if the staff did a good job in trying to reconcile the ordinance and the resolution, because there are some differences there. They're kind of minor mostly with respect to timing, but there are some differences there. And they did, in fact, authorize the parade or the motorcycle ride, which was conducted in the past for a number of years in order to kind of raise awareness of people being on motorcycles in the public way. So please be careful. But the question then is, well, can you have a resolution and an ordinance if they're not exactly in lockstep, that they both have some effect? Well, the answer, at least legally, is you can. You have these two methods by which you act: the ordinance, basically the law; the resolutions, which basically you can address administrative procedures for events, for a particular contract, for a particular period of time, a budget year. And so you can reconcile those and you harmonize those, or the city staff does. And that's what happened here. Now, and there are some areas, though, which did seem to be a little bit contradictory, or actually, really, if you don't want to have somebody try to say, well, how would you reconcile these city staff? This will just provide, I think, a little bit better guidance to city staff. So I tried to go through and look at some options for you to look at with respect to the language of the ordinance, on how it might be amended so that there wouldn't be these questions in the future. So those are kind of my basic thoughts on it. You received a memo from me. There was a memo in this week's packet about that. So I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. But with respect to these two legislative actions that you've done, that's perfectly appropriate. Really both have their own space within the legislative ambit. And here it's just a matter that you reconcile those to make them harmonious as best you can, so that the words are given effect to which you've enacted, whether it was the 2018 council or the council that enacted the ordinance back in, I don't know how many years ago. But looking at some of that language, it had to be more than a decade.
Questions for John? So, I understand what you're saying then, John, that, while there may be some differences between this ordinance and this resolution, that staff, as far as you're concerned, did have the authority to enforce the planning guide, even though this was really more like a parade.
I think they used both the ordinance and the planning guide, and the permit was issued. That's the bottom line. So I think, we can maybe make things a little bit better by making sure that the language is congruous in some ways. But you wouldn't expect the language to be repeated in both the ordinance and the resolution. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a need to have both.
And the question that's been asked repeatedly is that there's an insurance requirement clearly stated in the event guide, not clearly stated in the parade ordinance. And so there's been some precedent for parades to occur. Now, Mike, you take issue with this without the insurance requirement. So have we had parades that have not been required to have insurance?
And listening to them, they say that all of their parades that they've had in the past, they haven't had to do it. But in this particular circumstance, I think it's a matter of just having a hands-off administration in the past as opposed to the current administration. And the current guide, which I think kind of brought that to the forefront. So as a matter of fact, you can do that. And there was a United States Supreme Court case that came up. Justice Scalia wrote the opinion, and it was a unanimous decision. Unanimous. How often does that happen? But basically, that was a case, if I can find my notes here, it was a case, I'll give you the name of the case so you can look it up, or at least Judge Schubert can look it up.
Hey, now.
Thomas versus Chicago Park District. Justice Scalia wrote the opinion, unanimous Supreme Court, and there was an ordinance which required the applicant to pay an application fee, and potentially user's fees, and enter into an indemnity agreement to protect the city, and then obtain an insurance and provide an insurance certificate. And that permit was denied. The United States Supreme Court, in a unanimous decision, still upheld the action of the city with respect to that, saying that the ordinance was fine. In fact, in denying the permit in that particular case was fine. So in this case, you have less requirements such as I stated there. We have the insurance requirement and the small application fee, but some of the other requirements that they had in the Chicago ordinance aren't present in ours, and that one was found to be appropriate. And that still is good law, and I didn't see any even questioning of that, as you would probably expect with the unanimous Supreme Court decision. And so I think it is appropriate that you do that. I mean, it's something that you would do to protect your citizens, so that there'd be enough insurance out there if someone gets hurt or injured, including one of the other riders. Protect the staff, protect the city itself. So I think those are appropriate things, and when the policy guide, which again took years and years to come up with, was adopted, that was included, and I think it was probably a wise decision to include that.
So the other question that's come up is, you can't ride a motorcycle in the state of Wyoming without carrying insurance. And so why do you need to have an insurance policy for a parade or a special event if all of these people have their own insurance?
Probably three things. One, we're not going to check everyone to make sure that they have it. Two, even if they have it, our Wyoming financial responsibility laws are basically $25,000 per injury, $50,000 per accident, no matter how many people are hurt, or $20,000 in property damage. And so almost certainly, given the cost of one visit to the emergency room for some child that was hurt, or some rider that was hurt, or some property that was damaged by someone crashing into a Mercedes-Benz, you're not going to have enough insurance to pay that. And if there's a serious injury, of course, then you're going to have the deep pocket syndrome, where they'll be looking at the city staff, trying to find some type of a violation there. And in this case, the city is permitting this, and so therefore it kind of makes you a target. Well, you permitted this to happen. Why were you, anticipating this? Why couldn't you have foreseen this or that? And then of course you're in the middle of a lawsuit. So if we have this additional insurance out there, it protects the city coffers as well.
Just issuing a permit then creates some exposure for us, essentially.
Sure can, if we issue it negligently, or if we're not taking the appropriate precautions, knowing exactly what's going to happen, knowing what we hope is going to happen.
Mike?
Mr. Mayor, I think, and some of this was addressed in in Mr. Henley's memo, but I think it's really important too to remember that if a and we all always hope that no, there's not going to be a problem or anything, let alone a great big problem. But if there is, if somebody gets seriously injured or something like that, it's entirely foreseeable that a potential injured person is sitting there with really bad injuries because something happened, something went wrong, and they sit there and say, and they advance a theory that says, well, in the event planning, the group that planned the event planned it and set it up in a negligent manner, and something about how they were conducting their event is what caused this series of injuries. And also there was something negligent that the city did or did not do in how it was planning this, and all of this action by the group and action by the city. That's what caused this serious injury, and that's something that is totally different than an individual driver or something runs into someone and injures them. That's an entirely, totally different theory, and that's what the city, I think, needs to have some coverage and protection for, number one, but also under the Wyoming Supreme Court case, the Cody Country Chamber of Commerce case, where they were the Cody Country Country Chamber of Commerce, which was an unincorporated entity, Chamber of Commerce up there in Cody. They put on this Wild West show and shootout and pretend stage robbery every night during tourist season in front of the Irma Hotel. Some really bad things happened up there. Horse reared up, a blank gun misfired, I forget what all. A person got really seriously injured, and there was a lot of money involved in taking care of this. They filed suit, and they prevailed. They proved their damages, and I think it was like hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And all of a sudden, what they found, and under Wyoming law, they went and they started going to each member of the Cody Country Chamber of Commerce and saying, "Oh, you're the richest guy in the thing. Okay, 500,000, please." And they sat there, "Whoa, wait a minute." And the Wyoming Supreme Court said no. In that kind of an event, and an incorporated association like that, you betcha, they can pick and choose who they want to go against personally. And they had to pony up and pay that. And that's something that these groups, they need to be protected too. Their members need to be protected from that kind of exposure, as well as protecting the city from, as I say, an entirely different theory of a case. Rather than just one driver caused a collision.
Did Mike just articulate why the insurance is in the special events policy?
I think that's another good reason, absolutely, to protect, of course, the people who purchased it, which would be, in this case, the motorcycle owner.
Okay. And you're, so basically without, just to be, okay, I saw some hands. Now Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I've got a more specific question. Where do we buy this insurance and how much does it cost? Is it gonna be $100 per individual entrant in a parade? Or is it $1,000 for the entire parade? I just, before we act on this, I'd like to know what some of the numbers really are. Is that possible to
I've
gather that
looked at
kind
the
of
events
stuff?
guide for a while, isn't that
Well,
specified?
I know that they did buy a policy
They
here, so I
purchased
don't
it
know
in
how much
free
that
market.
cost, and I think they had $1 million
It's not purchased from the city.
in coverage, and so it's group coverage for the event. And I don't know how much that was, and I don't know if either Mr.
I guess I'd like to know that kind of information before we say yea or nay on the whole thing.
It's not coming from the city.
Okay.
I recently had an event that I purchased everything. And I checked with Allstate, my agent that I normally go through, and basically for the requirements that they ask, 50,000 for this, and then 2,500 for this, and then 500,000 for this other one. I ended up place that I went through, which was a free market online, ended up purchasing $1 million on all of it, and it cost me $230 for that insurance through the group. And that's not refundable. That's $230 for a 2-hour event. Was gone, which wasn't a big deal. I mean, that kind of hurt a little bit, but it was okay. So you're looking at for an event, and that was 100+ people. Now, if you're looking at more than 100+, most likely it goes up. If you include something about pools, or if you include anything water, that goes up significantly. Luckily, my events were 2 different events in a sense. So the one that I did in the street was $230 for 100+ people.
Did you have something to add, Kristen? Just go ahead.
I was just gonna clarify that the insurance is not purchased from the city. It's purchased from free market insurance agents, which is absolutely not something that we need to be involved in or in any way, shape, or form. They can choose. We're not telling them who they have to get it from. They can buy it from a local agent, they can buy it from a national agent. It just has to be secured from a licensed insurance agent.
And I haven't looked at the guide for a little while. Can somebody remind me what it says about insurance? Is there a certain amount of coverage that's required? What does it actually say?
There's a couple of options there, Mayor, Council, that, one is for lower, risk things. When you get into the water events, I think as Councilman Bates referenced, and there's, certainly that goes up more. I think in this case, it was deemed to be kind of a high-risk thing because there were scores of motorcycles riding through multiple intersections and like maybe hundreds of motorcycles riding through intersections and like. So I think the requirement was that there be a higher limit. And I think in this case, it was $1 million like Councilman Bates procured for his own event.
The staff call basically what level of risk is involved.
Pursuant to basically the guidance which is within the guidelines.
Specifies that. I remember that
Policy,
now.
yes.
So if I'm understanding, Mr. Pad, who's with us tonight, made the statement that ordinance essentially trumps the resolution. You're taking issue with that and saying that they are not, even if they are in conflict, staff has the authority to enforce a resolution, even if there is apparent discrepancy between the resolution and the ordinance.
I think if they can't be harmonized, no, and then you would be looking to do, you would probably be looking to go with the ordinance, but where you can harmonize them, and here basically, it was all harmonized with, I think, with the exception of the timing of the thing. And so, when I went through it and I looked at things, how we can make it more clear, just so that there couldn't even be any concern. If somebody says, I want to get a special events permit, if they somehow think, oh, I read this ordinance, and it's gonna be kind of a parade, and so I wanna use that. Two, this will just harmonize them, I'm hopeful, a little bit better, but that's something I would, if you have a chance to take a look at between now and our next work session, then we can maybe propose an amendment, or you can propose an amendment, I can assist you in writing that up at some later date.
Just glancing at this, had this been the ordinance prior to this event, we wouldn't be having this discussion.
I'd like to think that we've certainly covered those things that are raised, which, are always good, because now they've been raised.
There is a question of whether some harm was caused or some unfairness was in place. Does anybody have an opinion about this, having listened to John? Mr. Pad's asked for us to reimburse this.
To answer your question earlier about what it is for the insurance, each occurrence should be at least $250,000, and a general aggregated should be at least $500,000, and it should state City of Casper, its employees, agents, officers, officials, and volunteers list as an addition insured. So you have to have that, and that's my understanding. That's not even just my little event. That's what it is. But as you talk to insurance and you start telling them what the event is, they raise it higher because of what the event
The
is.
risk level
Yes.
that they would assess.
Right, what they assess, not what is required by the city, if I'm reading this and understanding it correctly.
So any opinions from council as to whether, because again, the case was made that staff did not have the authority to enforce the special events guide because there was an ordinance that defined parades without an insurance requirement. Steve?
Well, what I would say then is if, you said if it was harmonized, that's one thing, but if it wasn't, it doesn't sound like it was completely harmonized, then it would have defaulted back to the ordinance and therefore they wouldn't have been required to do so. So,
Would not have,
is that correct?
No, I think it was harmonized, because, they both, you're not gonna have the same exact wording in both. Here, the special events guide, they provided an additional requirement, which the council had authorized. And it's with respect to event specific, which is a good way to do those things, because, you might have a neighborhood group wants to have an animal parade or a pet parade. Well, that's one thing that the staff can look at. On the other hand, you might have 100+ motorcycles going throughout the streets. That's a different event. And so that's why that special events guide and the fact that it was adopted by resolution makes perfectly good sense.
Did you say though that it was not harmonized because of a date or time?
I think there was a discrepancy there for that, but as it turns out, they received the permit in any event. So, there was, as best I can tell, there's really no they were asked, I think they had two options as to whether we, submit this 10 days before, whether we have to submit it 30 days before, 35 days before. But, I don't think that caused any particular harm because they were actually issued the permit. They got to do their event.
So I guess it says direction requested here, so, I guess I'm gonna ask council, because I agree with your statement, Mr. Pad, that it's not about the money, it's about the principle. Was the principle violated here in any way, in the opinion of council? Were we unfair in this situation, or do you feel like staff acted appropriately by enforcing the events guide, despite the fact that there was an ordinance that described how to get a parade permit? Ray?
Yeah, I agree with the principle of it and what Paul was saying. I think I understand what John is saying, that I think past administrations have not enforced it, and we're making it coincide and consistent at this point, and trying to make it part of that. And I think that's trying to go forward from here to make it align is critical, and communicating that further and for other organizations and so forth. So, I'm in support of trying to keep this as consistent and agree with John's statement on where we're at on that. So, Kristen?
I agree. I think at the end of the day, this is absolutely great to get it cleaned up. This is taken care of because the special events guide has been passed and the resolution's been passed. There's insurance on events like this for a reason. I mean, coming from a parent who had a son had a pretty serious accident that cost an enormous amount of money. These types of insurances are there for a reason. You can't rely on somebody's individual insurance that they say they have. So I think I'm in agreement that we weren't clear necessarily between the two, but I absolutely think it's a requirement going forward, which we've already passed, just to make that clear.
Any other opinions? Do we have any obligations to the group based on how this event was how this event was handled?
Yeah, I'm still not clear where you go to buy this insurance and how much it costs. Now, I do know that when we used to sponsor motorcycle races, the American Motorcycle Association offered insurance for the race, and in yacht races we've had on Alcoba, the American Yacht Racing Union provided insurance for every one of them. And I'm not sure where a group of 20 or 200 motorcycle riders go to get this insurance.
Any private insurance company.
I think you do it.
I mean, we can't
you can
require
do.
insurance if you can't buy it.
You can.
I think you call your insurance company, I can do. Kristen?
Correct. You would literally just go to like your agent that sells you home or auto insurance, and if they don't offer it, there's going to be another agent in town that does. Unless you're doing something like crazy risky where you're like, these guys are jumping out of a plane with no parachutes, then you probably can't get insurance. But I mean, as long as, yes, the risk will increase the dollar amount, but some insurance agent somewhere will sell a policy.
The insurance can be obtained through a reputable insurance company. There are several available online. Many of the event planners use eventhelper.com. That may be a resource, well, was for me, but anyways, eventhelper.com. So you could use, as I said, you could use your own insurance. As I called Dee Dee with Allstate, and she helped me out tremendously, but in the end I did have to end up going to the event helper.
We are going to have to move on here, but Carter?
To answer the question, Mr. Mayor and Councilman, about the cost, $250 is a very typical number that I hear. I believe the bill that the motorcycle group submitted was $260. If that's correct, thereabouts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I think generally speaking, $100 less than that or $100 above would be out of the ordinary.
Steve?
Just real quick, so I guess the way I'm looking at it is that obviously we need the insurance to be in place for any event that takes place that protects everybody on both sides. If we're looking at this to make changes to the ordinance, proposed changes to the ordinance, and obviously it wasn't clear enough, and therefore I would make the recommendation that the money that was paid for them, being it was not clear enough, be given back to them. We make the changes that need to be made to this ordinance, and moving forward, it should be clear at this point exactly how this process works.
Other opinions on whether we should reimburse the motorcycle group for their insurance premium?
I'm good with that.
I agree.
We have,
We've got 5.
we got 5.
Yep.
Okay. All right, well, let's get this fixed. That, they, had this been in place, I think we would have solved a lot of problems. We just didn't realize there was a discrepancy there. Okay. Any other comments on this matter? Okay, you satisfied, Mr. Pad?
I am pleased that you'll reimburse us on that. I still, I was reading his proposal here, and it's totally, it's not gonna work the way he wrote up the proposed changes. But the guy, just to touch, if I may, just on this guide real close,
Well-
it doesn't, it's not an accurate guide. It doesn't even cover like a group of 200.
Okay, would you do this for us if there are problems with the guide?
Yes.
Just send us all a group email, and we'll look at that and see if we wanna put it on a work session agenda. And then if we do make these, if we do consider these proposed changes to the ordinance, that will happen in a regular council meeting with 3 readings. There'll be public comment at all 3 readings, and many times we've heard public comment that have caused us to make some changes to the ordinance language. So, okay?
That's all we ask.
All right. Fair enough, let's move on then. Museum donations.
Mr. Mayor, thank you, members of the council. The museum donation that we're speaking to specifically is with regard to the Tripany collection that the city has been very fortunate to receive from the Tripany family. We're very grateful for that addition, and look forward to seeing that being fully exhibited in the Fort Casper Museum. The Fort Casper Museum Association has agreed to partner with the city to raise funds necessary to provide to the family as kind of an exchange, if you will, with regard to the city receiving the collection, which we appreciate the association for doing as well. The direction that is needed is with regard to the information that the association can share with potential donors that would reflect the way in which the exhibit would potentially be supported and the ways in which donors could expect to see their dollars used moving forward. In one case in particular, an example I should say, that council could consider and that the association would like to understand probably more clearly is whether or not the association should be raising funds also for an expansion of the museum in order to house the Tripany collection. If indeed that's the case, the council would need to be willing to indicate the level of commitment that the city would put forward by way of supporting that expansion. And so if council wants to see the expansion take place, further discussion would need to be had with regard to, the budgetary priority that the council would like to see dedicated to that effort. If council does not think an expansion is necessary to house the Tripany collection, then council needs to indicate accordingly as well. We're hoping that we can get real clear direction from the council that would allow for the association to move forward, understanding what the outcomes would be and what the funding goal would be, and ostensibly what the end result would look like in the form of housing the collection in an expansion or not. I can tell you that we have not made a commitment as it relates to expanding the museum to house the collection. We certainly believe that some rework is going to be needed to house the collection appropriately, if all done on site at the Fort Casper Museum. We think we have some space currently that we could readjust that has been used for rental space and programming space that would house a collection, even if it would be on an interim basis if council would prefer. So my point is, we've got some options, we've got some things to think about. We have not committed the city to making an expansion happen, but we do need council to weigh in on what you'd like to see with respect to fundraising efforts and outcomes, and how ultimately you'd like to see the collection supported.
Questions for Carter, comments? Ken?
So, according to our packet, it said that the estimated cost for a 1,500 square foot addition would be around 900,000, correct?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, that is our first blush attempt at trying to quantify what that could look like.
Okay, and then, if I may, Mayor, follow up with, for a existing space that you mentioned that they have, that's estimated at 50,000 estimated. But what is the square footage of that existing space? What's the difference between the 1,500 square foot, and I didn't see in the information what the existing square footage is.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, that's a great question, and again, that does envision using the existing footprint to make the Tripany exhibit, if you will, occur. If I could get Mr. Cortez to go into a little more detail in that regard, Mr. Mayor, that would really be helpful.
Sure, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. We kind of have kind of a, for those of you who might recall being in there at some point, we have a kind of classroom that's got kind of a sink area inside there. I would call that area, probably around 600 square feet. And then next to it, we have kind of a meeting space, and it's got portraits that are typically displayed along each wall of that as you go in there. And I'd probably say that space is probably around 800, 900 square feet. So in totality, you're probably looking about the same amount of square footage. The difference would be is if we were to add on, we would build it to suit the collection or any other ideas that we would have. Whereas now we would have to reconfigure the way it's shaped now, and probably move some partitions and stuff to accommodate the collection. Maybe not quite as customized as we would like. So that's probably how I'd frame that up, if that answers your question, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
If I may follow up, so because I stopped by and looked at it because I was curious about it, and the one that I was shown was a smaller one next to the giant room, but the bigger room that's there wasn't mentioned about being used at all. It was more of just that smaller room, which, just like I said, it was about, I could see it being 600 square feet. So was I given that inaccurate, or is it looking at using that bigger section too?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, I think that it kind of goes out of the scope of my knowledge about designing exhibits. And then we also have the family's wishes that we kind of like to come and harmonize with, as Mr. Henley would say. And so our hope would be is we wouldn't have to go into the larger space, and if we keep it. And just so you know, between the two spaces, it's kind of a collapsible wall. So we have the ability to open it up and maybe move some stuff around. Our hope would be is that we could get it within that classroom space, but I see that being very tight with the amount of items that we have. So I think it would be pretty likely that we would get with the design team and say, okay, this is what council's direction was, is to get it in this area. How can we best fit it in here and still accomplish what the family would most desire? And hopefully, I guess what I'm saying is we can kind of be flexible on how much space we would need to carve out of that larger room.
Gotcha.
I think Kristen was waiting for you. Go ahead.
So ultimately, if we used those open spaces for this collection, we would in theory lose the classroom space, correct?
Correct. We would
So,
use the programming space that the city manager.
Exactly, and I don't know this, but I would imagine that when schools and stuff are coming and doing trips, they need that space to maybe incorporate the curriculum or whatever it is that they're doing. So we'd also lose that. I know that we'd gain space for the exhibit, but we'd potentially lose that space for rounding up 30 wild fourth graders to talk about the exhibits and the things that tie into the curriculum.
Is that correct, Tim?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman, that is exactly correct. They do a number of functions on a monthly basis in there that includes children and also crafts type stuff that they do, hence the sink and the countertop and the materials that are available for those things. So you're absolutely correct. To include, you know, if we were to infract on the larger space, once again, you run into the same thing, which is we have a number of exhibits that travel through Fort Casper that may not be accommodated anymore if it was a smaller space in there as well. So you're hitting the nail on the head. There's a balance there, and that's kind of why we're coming to you for a little more direction.
I was gonna bring up what you pointed out, looking at it, and also taking my own kids there for the crafts and things like that. The other aspect that I guess I look at is when we adopted that, we talked about bringing people to Casper and wanting people to come to Casper. And Fort Casper is one of those that if we invest in, people are going to want to come and check it out. The more we invest in our museums, and it's going to attract people from all over, could be even all over the world, to come see what we have. And it's could be potentially a lot of money, but I think the expansion is that of what we committed to, of making everything better and more appeasing to people.
And I do have to go, folks, but, and then, as Carter points out, a funding source would need to be identified. And so that's the discussion to have if we want to go down that road. And before I leave, I just remind folks that we denied a request for the, is it Kadoma? The foundation that runs the Bishop Home, to get their facility started that would have a similar purpose to showcase the history of Casper. And there are other facilities too. The Science Zone wants to get out of the basement, and there's just a lot of needs for expansion of facilities. The difference, of course, being that Fort Casper is ours.
Correct.
So we have a responsibility to maintain it and expand it, I guess, if need be. So I'm going to have to turn this over to the Vice Mayor, and I will see you all in 2 weeks.
Any other questions on this?
Just 2 quick questions. I think I might be a tiny bit confused because I know you'd said that they need this to kick off fundraising. So would it be worded as, you know, we're fundraising, but the city will pick up whatever's left of the 900? Or how does that tie into the fundraising? I guess I'm a little confused there.
Mr. Vice Mayor, Councilwoman, the reality is council can frame the way that this looks however you'd like. You have that option before you. And so in, say, the one end of the continuum, council could say, you raise the $30,000, we'll come up with the 900. You know, that's one sort of option you could choose. Or council could say, we're going to make it really, really nice in the footprint that we have available, and so we'll commit $100,000 to make that exhibit happen, and happen in a very classy way. And you can be anywhere in the middle, and in between those two sort of ends of the continuum, if you will. What we wanted to be sure that you knew was that the agreement that we have with the family and the commitments that we made are not on this end of the continuum as it relates to the promise of building a wing on Fort Casper to display the exhibit. On the other hand, with regard to the way that the exhibit could potentially be displayed within the footprint that we have available, we do think it's appropriate to have the family's input into how that looks and how it's displayed, to honor the family and the collection, as well as the association and even all of you. So we've got a lot of options to consider. You're in the driver's seat with regard to how you want to see it happen. And if you decide you want to come to this end of the continuum and look at building an addition, we would take that direction and put together a lot more homework that we would bring back to you and say, here's what we think we can do. And here's a budgetary means of making it happen. And we think we can make it happen in X number of years. Long answer for maybe a simple question. I'm not sure.
No, absolutely, and I guess just my follow-up to that would be, if you have a fundraising campaign where basically you're like, whatever we don't raise, it'll just be taken care of. People are not going to donate.
That's right.
Because they'll be like, it's taken care of, why am I giving my money to this? Like, I can give my money to something that won't happen if I don't donate my money to it. And so I think that's a little bit of a dangerous campaign, fundraising campaign, like wording, I guess. I don't know the intention wording, but the only other thing I'd say is the addition simply for this exhibit and truly nothing else?
Mr. Vice Mayor, Councilwoman, the 1,500 square feet is Carter County Plan. That's kind of our first blush.
Mm-hmm.
The very preliminary design of the exhibit that I've seen would incorporate about 1,100 square feet up to 1,500 square feet. So you kind of build in a little bit, maybe for some storage and such. But if that answers your question,
Yeah.
the vast majority,
Mhm.
of at least 2/3, would be occupied probably just by this exhibit.
Okay. Ray, did you have a question?
No, Kristen had brought it up. Got answered. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor. I just, the numbers are a little bit different than what I would anticipate for building a 1,500 square foot building. That's $600 a square foot. That's a lot of dollars per square foot. So I guess my trend would be to say, let's house it in available space that we have available right now, not using the large meeting room, using other adjacent areas in that, and commit in the long run to try and come up with a match arrangement. We have done this on a number of 1-cent projects. Matter of fact, we started out twice with the Lyric. They never got their funds raised, and as a result of that, that money never left the city's coffers. And I guess I'd propose that we try and start a reasonable demonstration of what the family has provided or what Tripoli has provided, and then we commit to a long-term financial commitment if there is a match. Would that?
I like
Hope I'm shooting for the middle of your table there, guys.
Yeah.
Which end of the continuum is he on?
So I guess do you have anything to answer or talk about on that, or?
Mr. Vice Mayor, Councilman, that might not be a bad alternative with regard to the possibilities that exist here. I would say that council should probably be careful with regard to the upper limit that you'd like to see in terms of a match commitment, even if in our most wildly successful fundraising efforts, they get to 50% of whatever that number is. And so that'd be the only thing I might add to that kind of an idea.
And I guess my proposal would be less than half, considerably less than half. We'd shoot for like 200, they come up with 8 or 6.
Sure.
Something like that.
Sure.
If you don't mind me asking, do you have a recommendation?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Bates, I appreciate the question. My recommendation would be that if indeed council wants to do anything in terms of committing to some degree to an expansion, that it be under the format that Mr. Hawkins described with parameters set. But I would say also to that question that I do think we can house the exhibit and present it very respectfully and in a classy way within the footprint that we have available.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Napier, has the family, have they expressed a strong feeling one way or the other about this to you, or?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, all I can tell you is that the agreement does not require an expansion to the fort to happen in order for the exhibit to be, given to the city or exhibited by the city. We're lucky that we have a member of the family here tonight who can express an opinion one way or the other, but the agreement does not mandate that the council do it one way or the other.
Anybody else have anything to add, or did you want to hear from him, Mike?
I wouldn't mind that.
Okay.
Mike's brother might feel a little bit demoted to find that, or one or the other of you apparently aren't a member of the family.
We don't claim each other. So, first of all, Mr. Vice Mayor, Councilman, thank you very much for the leadership and the commitment you've taken in having an interest in the Trinity Collection. And it was 100 years ago, 2 years ago, that drugstore was built, and it is really a novelty that you can have an entire collection like that 100 years later. The family very much feels like that there've been lots of times that this city council has shown sort of a vision that goes beyond the contours of where we are right now. And I think the idea of expanding to a much bigger, to the 900,000 site is where the family would like to see it go. It's fundraising. The council is not committing itself to paying that money. And if the money isn't raised just like it was in Elyria, there'll be no obligation for the council to expend that money. And I think the councilman is correct. I think this could be a source of bringing tourism and interest to the city. You know, Fort Casper is bigger than Fort Casper. It really is the repository for history in central Wyoming. And this is a really inextricable part of central Wyoming history. If you house it in the current setting, the inextricable fact is you're gonna lose the classroom setting. It's severely limited. And that really is not the function of Fort Casper. It's not the redheaded stepsister of the city. It is really one of our jewels, and we want to show it. And I think the Tripoli collection will add to that. And we by the way, our last name is Shickage. We're not owned by the Tripoli family either. Our mother was a Tripoli, so it's our paternal grandmother. We're gonna help with fundraising. And we're gonna hit all the local community groups and see if we can make that. Whether we can do it or not, I don't know. Let's suppose we only raise 120,000. Well, there's 120,000 more for the museum and for the collection than we would add if we just keep our thoughts and our ideas low. So there's really no money out of the council's pocket at this point. It's just an endorsement for the concept that this is something we should do. It's worth it for our community. Thank you again.
Right.
Yeah, I'm glad Michael had a chance to talk, because I think if we give ourselves an opportunity to support it, and because I don't think the city's in any position, obviously, to fund something to that magnitude at this point, but I think if we can get behind that in that sense, support the family, I'm good with that.
So I guess what's council's pleasure on what is the funding aspect of this?
I like what Bob proposed.
Did we set, what parameters were you guys thinking, I guess?
Well, my thoughts were, use the space that we currently have allocated, not allocated, but that we can use to display it for now with a commitment perhaps on the order of 200,000 if they raise the remaining whatever numbers they want to spend. If they want to spend 5 million, have at it, but we're only giving them 200,000. So we fix our number, we allow it to be displayed pretty quickly, I assume, and then we go from there. But this gives the folks at Fort Casper something to say, the city is committed to do this, and therefore would you provide some of your cash to give us?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make some sense?
Any thoughts on that or questions?
Mr. Vice Mayor, if I could just raise one, just to get a little more clarification on the proposal that Councilman Hoppe is putting forth. To do the display properly, and the designers kind of say it's going to be around $200,000 to just do the display. So I guess I probably just need a little more clarification on what you mean, kind of in this interim period, what you were kind of thinking, because to probably do it any kind of justice, it would be difficult to just kind of put it in the classroom as it kind of sits now without really expending any funds. Could we do it? We could, but we would not be doing the exhibit any justice. It's probably just my gut feeling.
I would agree with that.
200,000.
Ken and then Mike.
So, Mr. Cortez, is what it almost sounds like it's either or. Either we have to expand, or we have to redesign the little room and the bigger room to fit that. It's either or, it sounds like.
Mr. Vice Mayor, Councilman, I probably wouldn't frame it like that right now. We have by contract till 2022 to display it in the museum in some way, shape, or form. I was just thinking, you know, Councilman Hopkins' proposal, if we wanted to showcase it in some way, shape, or form in the interim period between now and then, that's what I was looking for some clarification on.
Gotcha.
But if we wanted to keep it stored where it's at, which is in the classroom, until this plan, the direction we get from you tonight, and it kind of progresses and we see what the fundraising effort can do, then I think later on, we'd probably eventually get to that question, but I think it's a better ways off, the either or aspect.
Gotcha. Okay.
Mike? Councilman Bates's question and Tim's answer kind of answered a lot of my questions. I'm always concerned because, you know, it seems to me that the city has a bad or maybe a good habit sometimes of that temporary becomes permanent. And it becomes, well, okay, this is displayed, so there's no need to look for a more permanent thing. Number one. Number two, if this is just kind of, for want of a better term, sort of schlocked together and everything, then people that might be potential donors are gonna come and look at it and think, geez, you know, they wanna raise money for that, that's, you know, and so I'm kinda concerned about that. I think it's real important that we do this in a, you know, in a well thought out and well planned out manner, so that it's gonna, you know, be accorded the classy handling that I think it really deserves. And so, you know, I'd be a little bit reluctant about putting together some kind of a temporary exhibit or something other than maybe using some things as bait to get people to donate.
Perhaps I misunderstood. I didn't realize we were talking 200 to put the display together.
Yeah.
I thought we were talking put the display together in some form, but 200,000 to arrange it?
How do I get that job?
Mr. Hopkins, the $200,000 number is to exhibit the full thing within the current footprint. That doesn't mean that we can't use the space that's currently allotted in some way to exhibitize the collection, maybe not in its full form. We've got a lot of options in terms of partial displays in the interim. We've got a lot of options with respect to displaying the whole thing in probably a price tag that Mr. Cortez has identified. So again, we're kind of along the continuum here, and if council needs more information with respect to what we're talking about, either on the $900,000 end of the continuum or somewhere in between on the $200,000 portion of it as well, we can bring all that forward because both are big numbers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Certainly, we want to get it displayed, and if we need to look for interim solutions, we can do that too.
Go ahead, Steve.
I would just prefer that we do get, just as you said, more information on what an actual cost would be for an expansion, and then the cost of what it would be just to put the display up inside. And if we have until 2022 to actually display it, then I would not display it until we can actually look at those numbers and make an informed decision of which way we want to go.
Any thoughts on that? I personally, I mean, this is becoming a really expensive donation, in my opinion, and I don't mean any offense, and I understand, and, you know, it's our job to look after the people's money, and the council has, in the past, had some pretty expensive donations in the past. So, those are my only thoughts on it, I guess. Bob, did you have something else?
Yeah, but I think that's perhaps a reasonable approach. Take some time now, since we do have a few years to do it. We would also have the option to make that part of 1 cent 17. So I think that's a reasonable approach. And in the meantime, if we can find a reasonable way to display it in the space we have, which I think was kind of our original concept, if we can do that, just to get us started, I think that'd be wonderful. It's a great display.
Mr. Vice Mayor, city manager, I think, is asking for some direction on this. And what I would suggest is that it would be a good idea for the council to make a commitment that we, you know, that we do want to accept this, we want to display it in the kind of a form that it should be displayed in. That we are very much supportive of fundraising activities for doing this, and that in some fashion we will provide a match, as Councilman Hopkins earlier said, to you know, to match any fundraising that's there, to give these guys and the port, you know, an official sort of approval to go out and start fundraising if they want to, and to do that, and then we can kind of fill in the details a little bit later. That's what I would suggest that we provide as direction for. Does that give you and your staff enough direction to kind of have something to work towards?
Mr. Mayor and Councilman, I think it does. It gives us some basic tenets to kind of work around and fill in the gaps for other information sessions like this, and continue working towards an outcome. You bet.
Do you want to add something real quick?
The one thing that I was going to say is, I know that we're thinking, oh, 2022 like sounds like a long ways away. A couple things that we do need to remember is economies have a tendency to go absolutely haywire around presidential elections, which we're coming up on one in between now and 2022. So we don't know what that looks like. We don't know if that means things are just going to go really, really good, really, really bad. So I definitely agree. I think the wording needs to be preferably very vague as any type of future promises, just because we don't know what that looks like. I mean, things might be great, and we might be able to show up with plenty if we choose to, or we might be in a situation where, like, no, we're taking care of base functions and nothing else.
Mr. Vice Mayor, I might also add, for all of your edification and for the association's edification as well as the family, that indeed we would be pleased to work with the association and the family to put together a proposal that council can wrap their heads around, that has more detail and so forth. You know, ultimately, my point is, this is going to be a process where we engage the association, we engage fundraisers and potential donors as well as the family, and this won't be just a staff machination that we bring forward to you.
Is everybody okay with that then?
Great, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Food truck permits.
It just hurts, like when you say it. Just
Ray, you want to run you want to run this? And I'll
I'm okay.
I'll go wait outside. Go ahead, Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor, members of the council. The original question with regard to this issue, or this phase of the issue, if you will, is pertaining, if I remember correctly, to specifically the temporary permits that can be issued in order for out-of-town mobile vendors to come into town and operate, and perhaps even operate under sort of the radar, if you will, of inspections that the city might conduct. The idea being that might present some sort of business advantage and that sort of thing to some of our local mobile vendors. However, that question is not as easily answered as you might imagine with regard to this particular issue, and we actually have a proposal that we think can streamline that process and so forth. But as we lead up to that proposal, I want to bring you into sort of the process that we went through to get to that answer, if you will. The larger question in my mind was why it is viewed that Casper is more regulatory, if you will, of mobile vendors than any other city in Wyoming, and perhaps even Denver. And so to me, that was probably a larger question that needed answering as a means of getting to the proposal that we would offer to you to deal with the temporary permits and so forth. I would also remind you, however, that the other question that we need to answer tonight, with the help of our friend from the county health department here, is with regard to what open space trailers can do as a solution for those who may need to be in place longer, if you'll remember that. I don't know if you remember that question that was posed to us the other night, and so I'm just kind of giving you a heads up that we may need some insight from you on here later in this discussion. The question that vexes me, though, again, how is it that Casper is viewed as the most regulatory environment as it relates to food trucks? So we did a little research. I had the author of that statement come in and visit with me and kind of get me to how he views it that way and what his world would dictate as to that sort of perception, if you will. And then we also called a number of communities whose names have been dropped in some of these conversations, not the least of which was the city of Denver, as you can see on your chart that we included in your packet. And I think it provides some really interesting information. You will notice that some of our fellow communities around this state don't even allow mobile vendors, particularly food vendors, within a certain radius of a brick and mortar restaurant. Furthermore, you will see that some of our fellow communities don't allow them in their central business districts at all, or in parks or whatever. I was really interested to note with regard to the city of Denver specifically, and I'm just going to read it directly from their website. It says that mobile food vendors are not allowed within 20 feet of intersections, not on any street, alley, or right-of-way in the central business district, not allowed in a park or within 300 feet of a park or parkway unless associated with a public event or special occasion. And then it goes on to say, Denver requires all food trucks to get a retail food mobile business license. The cost to apply is $200, and the license fee annually is $125. Another statement, no vending shall be permitted within city right-of-way, period. And then, of course, you see in your chart there some of the fees and so forth that are associated with the various permits. As I visited with not only the author of that statement, but also our friends from the county and folks within our organization, I was surprised to learn that indeed we do have multiple inspections currently with regard to mobile food vendors. One of which is a health inspection at the county level, and a health inspection at the city level. And we actually give a health license, if you will, for mobile food vendors, but also brick and mortar food vendors as well. For some of our fellow communities that operate, in the absence of something like that, they do have a business license program wherein all businesses in their communities, their respective communities or whatever, are required to get some sort of license. And that, to me, is different than what we do here in Casper, but we can deal with that question a little later. My point to all this is this, and this effectively becomes my proposal, staff's proposal. We can certainly do away with the health license that the city requires for mobile food vendors. And that's in Section 8 of your code, and I think we put that in your packets. If not, we can certainly make that copy available. That would effectively exempt mobile food vendors from having the need for a health license issued by the city. We would probably only suggest that with regard to a strengthened relationship between the county health department and effectively the state and the city, in that current practice has not required the county to issue their license pursuant to feedback from the city, because the city has had their sort of duplicate process, if you will, that has been documented through what they call a gray slip inspection. I can tell you that having gone through this conversation more than once now, I assure you that I do still get confused as to the various nuances that these inspections can take and the routes and so forth that vendors have to go through. But the one thing that you'll need to be aware of and be attentive to is the fact that indeed, in the absence of a business license network or program that our city does not have, we are suggesting that even with the exemption that might be granted by amending Section 8 of our code, you will still be requiring restaurants, barbershops, daycares, and so on to go through a separate health inspection that is over and above what it is that the county and or state does with regard to the practices that they incorporate. And so we believe that in order to get to the heart of dealing with the temporary food permit that mobile vendors can receive from out of town, we suggest looking at Section 8, amending Section 8 to remove that stipulation, amending Section 8 in such a way that any inspection from the city that would be over and above what it is that the county health department does would simply not be needed anymore. But there are other discrepancies that you need to be aware of that other cities and towns have found a way around through the process of a business license type program and other things. Long-winded explanation, I realize that. Unfortunately, these types of questions don't come with real easy answers, but I do think that by amending Section 8, you do streamline the process for mobile food vendors and their ability to talk about how Casper is over-regulatory is further debunked with a move of that nature.
Any questions or comments? Okay.
How does our health department feel about that?
If I could just, Mr. Vice Mayor, add a kind of a surface response to that and invite our friend from the health department to respond more directly. The idea would be that the county health department's policies would be amended in such a way that the fire department would be engaged on the front end of the process more so than through what we call the gray slip portion of the inspection that actually looks and feels like a second sort of duplicate inspection. But if I could defer, that would be very helpful.
Apologize if I don't address the council appropriately. I'm Ruth Hield. I'm Program Manager for Environmental Health Division at the Casper and Natrona County Public Health Department. So as far as what's being referred to as the health license, the license titled Businesses Affecting Public Health, our participation in it is that we approve these facilities from a health standpoint. In the past, that also required the fire department's approval and building for brick and mortars, but also mobiles. That changed somewhat. We are still required by state statute and state regulation to license these as food service. So that is not going to change for us. We'll still be doing our health and sanitation inspections. We'll still assist them to get their license through the Department of Agriculture, their state license, so that they can operate on that. We participate with the city on the businesses affecting public health, but it's just a process that has always, or has been in place at least the 20 years I've been in environmental health.
Bob?
You're the people that come with thermometers and make sure the freezer's cold and the food's hot?
Yes, sir. That's
Okay.
us.
I'm happy with that.
Any other questions or comments? So you're asking direction tonight?
Mr. Vice Mayor, members of the council, if it pleases the council, what we would do then is just amend Section 8 to exempt mobile food vendors. And we would work with the city county health department to
Thank you.
to work on policies that would institutionalize the relationship between the fire department specifically and the health department as it relates to that initial agricultural license that our friend here identified.
Would be okay with that? Amending section 8? Yeah. Okay, get in on that?
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
All right, annexation update.
Wait.
Sorry, we specifically tabled the mobile vendor parking last week to talk about it this week. I guess I kind of thought that's what we were talking about.
Yeah.
Mr. Vice Mayor, I think that the portion that Councilwoman Lutz is referring to is with regard to the question as it pertains to the what I call the open face trailers, Frank. And you're right. We did agree to have that discussion as well, and maybe if I could kind of address that real quickly and potentially get some feedback as well from the health department. If I remember the question correctly, and please feel free anybody to amend what I'm saying because I may not have the issue well understood. The question that Mr. Hinton had, is it Hinton or Linton? Hinton was that if indeed he were to get a gig in front of Frontier Brewery, his concern was that for him to pull up and prepare in place his barbecue or his food, which is largely needs a long time to prepare, that pursuant to the regulations through the health department and pursuant to the limitations that we identify in the mobile vending parking permit program, downtown specifically, he would not have sufficient time to be on site or on premise or whatever in order to prepare his food given the length of time that is required. So his question was whether or not he would be limited forever from having that option available to him, or if there's some means by the county health department's interpretation as to preparing around the corner and then moving into site at 3 to be consistent with the mobile vending parking permit, or what his options are. And so I like I said, I may not understand the question totally because it to me seemed to be a relatively easy answer, but again, in this issue, no answers are relatively easy.
Right, 'cause it was,
Do I understand it correctly?
it took him, what, 12 hours to prepare his food, and it has to be on site.
Correct, he can't move.
Right, he can't move.
Because it's open.
So essentially, by the time that he could park and start preparing his food, it would be midnight before he could start serving his food, because that's how long it would take to
If
prepare.
you start at 3.
Correct.
Right.
So the question was, could he potentially park on private property and start preparing the food, and then at the designated time that he would be allowed to move into the spot, could he move a very short distance into the spot with food already halfway being prepared?
That's what I understood.
Do you have an answer to that?
Mr. Hinton, affectionately known as Lefty down at the health department. So the open face trailer that you refer to basically does not meet the criteria for a food service actual mobile unit. So he cannot have a mobile food service license through the Department of Agriculture, a state license. That type of open trailer is not allowed. So what we have allowed him to do is operate under temporary food permits, which are 14-day permits in one location for a single event. One of the stipulations of the temporary food permit is that all the food be prepared on site, so that we don't have people cooking their food in their home kitchens and bringing it in and serving it is kind of the control measure there. So that's kind of where we run at odds with the council's or the city's parking restrictions, is that we do require that on-site cooking. Now, having having said that, I have had a conversation with Mr. Hinton, and we've come to some understanding about perhaps how we could work around that. And if there are other units that have similar operations and that there may be some conflicts with the city parking ordinances, then we can perhaps work around that in some manner. It's kind of a matter of transporting the food. If they're cooking in one location, can they safely transport it to the serving location? But I think our compromise had been to kind of take it on a case-by-case basis and under certain circumstances, look at where would he be parking initially, how far is he gonna have to transport, what time he would be transporting, and just kind of oversee that operation a little closer. Kind of bends the actual intent of the food rule, but I think we can take it case by case, because I just really imagine that if we allow it for Mr. Hinton, there's going to be others that are gonna step forward and say, well, what about him? She ran into that situation before, but we have had conversations, so I don't know if that helps.
Do you have any questions further on that? Is there anything that anybody wants to suggest that we change on our end?
I'm still just struggling with, I understand, and I'm sure that before my time, there was a concise reason as to why we picked 3 p.m. to 3 a.m. But no matter what, we are still limiting it to who can do it. If I have a breakfast sandwich truck, I'm out. Nobody wants a breakfast sandwich at 6 p.m. at night. And I get that that's specific, but it's not just a breakfast sandwich truck. It's an open trailer that serves barbecue that needs longer time to serve. I mean, we can argue, okay, well, there's parking problems. Well, we actually have a $80,000, whatever it might have been, parking study that says we don't. And that says that, I mean, if I remember right, some of the comments were a lot of the people parking in front of the establishments are owners and workers. So, I mean, it's not limiting people to come there. Secondly, they're paying for those spots. I mean, it's not like we're just giving them something. They're paying to be there. I know that there was probably a reason why the times came up that way. It just, I think to me, it feels arbitrary why it's 3 p.m. to 3 a.m.
Okay.
I agree. I've said it from the get-go. Except I understand Monday through Friday. I understand that law offices, insurance, everything is open downtown Monday through Friday from 8 to 5, plus all the other businesses and people. So I understand why that one was done. I still don't I still 100% disagree with Saturdays and Sundays for that. I think that should just go away and they can be there anytime they want. So I still stand by that. But also, and I don't know if we want to take this in chunks, but also the discussion of the food or the vendors, period, is also regarding to clarifying the wording on whether, as Mr. Talbert had that vendor parked for the week long and council approved it, I thought we were going to clean that up, the wording on that as well. So it wasn't just, I thought this was going to be multiple sections of vendors, because that was, you last week, you had an idea of what it should say, and then Councilman Hopkins and then Councilman or Councilwoman Lutz, you brought up comments about what it said regarding it as well. So I guess what I'm saying is, and why we tabled it was to clarify. So I guess my thing of it is we have several sections we need to discuss of this. One is the timing, I agree. One is because we got the second reading next week regarding this specific discussion, if we're going to allow people to put in a permit to ahead of time to park there for longer than or earlier than what the time frame is. So anyways, I don't know how we wanna take that. I apologize.
Go ahead.
Well, I think that we have to keep a couple things in mind. These parking time limit restrictions were a compromise. They were, you know, we were getting input from people that if we allowed any mobile vendors on the streets of Casper, it was going to turn the entire town into a ghost town. It would kill all business. We had people saying the other extreme. And I just bring up those extremes that they're, you know, I understand, Councilman Bates, your idea of kind of just sort of open it up and let every, you know, I don't want to use the term
Only
free-for-all.
on weekends.
On weekends, but
Yes.
I appreciate that. But of all of the input that we got, there, you know, this was, these time limits were they were a compromise. And if we want to go back and revisit that whole thing, you know, and do away with that compromise and go in and try to take that all up again, yeah, okay, but boy, that's like putting your hand back on that hot stove because it's so much fun to have it there. And it's something that's not going to make everybody very happy. You're going to end up with a compromise somewhere along the line. I think that the thing that the staff brought up about cleaning up that ordinance with reference to giving the council a delineated ability to make exceptions, that's what that was about. And I think that's a good idea to say that, okay, you know, yes, there is a procedure for making exceptions to this on a case-by-case basis. But I would respectfully say that in terms of trying to, you know, in essence, throw that compromise out and go back, I think what you're going to find is that you're going to find just as many people saying, let's do what Councilman Bates says, and just as many people coming in and saying, let's not, and you're going to end up having to strike a compromise eventually anyway.
And along with that, I mean, we did give both parties, we told them, come to us with a compromise. Because if we have to do it, it's not gonna please everybody. And that's exactly what happened. They couldn't do it. So they had to come to us, and then we had to do it. And that's what the compromise was. So, I mean, if council's interested, to me, that's a whole separate work session topic. We're not gonna solve that tonight. So if we wanna revisit changing the times on the weekends, then that needs to be added to the work session list if council's okay with it. Is there
So we
interest for
amend it
that?
again.
Right.
Because we're already amending
No,
it right now.
I'm not saying I'm interested in it, because it was a fight and it was a compromise, and it was not an easy one. But if it's enough, if the numbers are on the council to bring that subject back up, it will turn into another weeks on end,
Years on
months
end.
of fighting it. And so we tried to compromise as best we could on that issue. But if that's what the council wants to do, the numbers are there. I'm voting against that.
Ken.
I would like to revisit because it was a somewhat different council, but on top of it, I'm not asking for the compromise during the Monday through Friday to be changed
The
in
weekend
any
was
way,
the-
shape, or
The
form.
weekend was the compromise.
The weekend,
Yes, the
Seeing it-
Monday through Friday was a big thing, weekends was a big thing. You know, Sundays was every element of that was a compromise.
and exactly, a lot of it's closed on Sundays. Most of the businesses are closed on Sundays and Saturdays. But I guess I would like to revisit for the simple fact of also the parties that was, and I don't know, I just watched it on YouTube, so I wasn't here, I wasn't present during that whole thing, but my understanding is the main people that was so much against it, as it's been brought up, are not business anymore, unfortunately, because one of them I really enjoyed going to, but it's the food truck's time, I guess, and we need to see what they do, and either I mean, I think you brought it up that or no, somebody brought up that Dallas Laird said, you know what? Just leave it be. Let's see what happens. Let's see. Just leave it alone. Let's see what happens. Don't even do anything. And it didn't. Council did get involved, but I just think weekends. I just disagree with it, and I'd like to revisit just the weekend.
All right, so we need to move on from this subject. So there were also, just to counter, there were a lot of silent people that were against it, that didn't want to be in the public eye on this because it was so contentious. So anyway, is there interest for revisiting the times on the weekends? Times in general for downtown, interest in revisiting all of that? Right?
I guess I'm not, I mean, it doesn't, this is,
Okay.
this is,
Is there anything else on the food trucks? We got the permit thing ironed out right with this change?
I think so.
Okay. And then, is there anything else? I think that gentleman is in contact with the health department for his aspect of things. So,
I guess I have one more question. So if you're taking this, the health inspection out of it and allowing that to be city county, have we addressed the fact of people, is that our way of addressing people coming in from other communities having less inspections to go through? Or are they still gonna have to go through a full inspection with the fire department and whatnot in order to get a temporary permit for a weekend? And I think that was the biggest concern, was that you have people from other communities that come in here that have less regulations on them, that where they can just get a temporary permit and go to work than what we're requiring of our local members.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, there will not be a temporary permit issued by the city. In my opinion, that we're attempting to try to remove that. The state has a temporary permit that they issue, and we do not have the authority to amend statute. And so from the city standpoint, there will not be a temporary permit issued through the city for mobile food vendors. Or temporary, I should say. Food vendors is probably the appropriate term. And it would be done.
I look forward to the day when food trucks is not on our agenda. Can we move on to annexation? We good? Annexation update.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of the council, this is an update and a request, if you will, in terms of our continued discussion with respect to annexation. On the update side of things, the Green Meadows annexation that we've discussed here before is, going through the process and so forth. And as a matter of fact, the annexation report is ready and will soon be delivered to the property owner that basically has the ownership of that trailer park. And so that is moving forward. They will receive that report. And then, of course, the subsequent step that takes place after that would be the public hearing, wherein council reviews information on the report, takes public comment, and then considers the ordinance that makes the annexation happen or not. So that's sort of the update side of things. The other thing I would mention, though, too, is that we certainly plan to have a neighborhood meeting wherein we will invite members of that community, if you will, into an informal setting with staff and answer questions and discuss the process and just generally have an informal discussion. We would like to invite members of the community that are in the subject areas with respect to the recommendations you have seen in your memo, particularly as it relates to the areas along South Poplar Street and on the east side of Robertson Road, the exhibits of which should have been included in your packets. Do we have those electronically here tonight by chance? No? Okay. The areas along South Poplar Street that we are suggesting need to be sort of the second phase of our annexation process are south, if you will, of South West Wyoming Boulevard, and adjacent to and contiguous with the city's limits. I think we understand that there are 13 properties that would be affected by that potential annexation. The situation with regard to that area of our community is along the lines of their previous arrangement, wherein they are currently receiving water and sewer services from the city, and in order to obtain that service, signed a pre-annexation agreement indicating that when the area in question was contiguous with the city's limits, and when the council decided to do so or thought it was appropriate, they would agree to become annexed into the community. And so those properties are ones that we would suggest would be a likely area to consider for annexation. The advantage that this particular area of town has is that this will not require major investments with respect to public infrastructure in the form of streets that need to be paved or built or extended, or water and sewer infrastructure, since that infrastructure is already in place pursuant to their interest to receive sewer and water in the past. And so that is why we think this becomes more advantageous. The payout, if you will, is relatively small, albeit positive, in that the yearly revenue anticipated from sales tax and property tax is anticipated to be in the neighborhood of $26,000 annually. That does not include the portion of franchise fees that would be dedicated to the city as a result of this portion of population, if you will, coming into the community. Which I would say, I don't think I recall that figure being calculated for the Green Meadow annexation either. And so that, I would ask you to remember, is another factor contributing to a cost-benefit scenario. And looking at the Robertson Road area in question.
Before you go on,
Yes, sir.
may I?
Yep.
Vice Mayor, thank you. Before you go on, just to double check on the Poplar Street one.
Yeah.
You mentioned that they agreed when it was time to annex some, that they agreed to that. I guess first question is, how long ago was that discussion, and has property owners changed in that time frame, and do they know of that agreement?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, I am not sure if each property was made aware of the existence of a pre-annexation agreement prior to their purchase of each of these properties. Certainly, I think, Mr. Collins, do you have that information at hand by chance for that question?
Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor, the property is recorded, that agreement, against each title, each deed, so they should have been aware if they were not aware. As for the date, I think that was the 80s. So it's been recorded against the property for quite some time.
Moving on to the second area that we would recommend for consideration of annexation, we would suggest the Robertson Road area. This is the area of homes, 14 homes east of Robertson Road and south and east of the Green Meadow area that we have previously talked about. We do not believe that they have access to city utilities, or currently use, I should say, city utilities. However, they are currently entirely surrounded by the limits of the city, and are serviced by Robertson Road, which is a road that the city maintains and repairs and so forth. This is different than the other area that we just talked about on South Poplar, in that I'm not aware of any pre-annexation agreements that are at stake. However, with regard to the availability of services that the city provides and so forth, in my estimation, this is a real natural area to consider. Again, when you consider the lack of a requisite amount of infrastructure to be developed in the form of streets. However, when indeed they do want to tie into city utilities, which I think is, you know, in the future here, that will be needed, of course, making that access available.
Any questions, comments?
Recommend we proceed.
Vice Mayor, I agree with Councilman Hopkins. I think we should proceed on all of these. Something that, and this is slightly off subject, but I would suggest that it's on subject and something that we need to talk about and think about always. You turn around and you look at that map. The city of Casper runs a very significant risk of being surrounded and choked if we don't continue growing and annexing. Because, you know, Mills is growing, that's a good thing. Evansville is growing, that's a good thing. Barnard's growing, that's a good thing. They have the potential of surrounding us and choking the city. And all you need to do to see what's wrong with that is like go down to St. Louis, Missouri, and the city of St. Louis is totally surrounded and choked and came near death by all the little towns all around it. That's something that when it comes to annexing and thinking about growth, that I think we really need to keep closely in front of us. And I would even maybe suggest we need to have a copy of that map over there so that when we're sitting there. And I like that seat there a lot better than this. But so that you can look at that and see that danger. But anyway, I think we should move forward on all these.
Do we have growth boundaries though?
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Vice Mayor, we do have urban growth boundaries that have kind of been a result of regional planning with each of the communities and so on. And both mills have those as well.
Like I mentioned about the Green Acres one, the people here, they will receive letters. They would have an opportunity. I mean, it's in the best interest to be annexed, I believe that, but because there is no condition on them, that they would have a voice in this.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Councilman, the public hearings are designed for the purpose to gather public input with regard to this potential move. Statutes would suggest that when a subject area is surrounded by the limits of the city, that their right to protest and stop the process is not available. And so there's statutory allowance to hinder a decision of the city to, and this would be any city, of course, in Wyoming, to hinder an annexation just isn't there. But that doesn't mean that you can't take public input and that you can't weigh your decision based on that input that you receive.
Any other questions? Thumbs up to move forward. Okay. So we discussed the vacancy already, so on to agenda setting. This is for the August 13th work session, I believe, right? Yep.
Is that where we're at?
I think so. We have July 23rd already done, so yeah, August 13th. Any suggestions from council or any time crunches for staff that need to go on there?
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Vice Mayor, if I can draw your attention to the furthermost back page, the portions highlighted in yellow would be ones that we would have timeliness concerns for the meeting of the 13th. And so if it pleases the council, we would like your blessing to at least docket those particular items.
Is everybody okay with that, those two items? Okay. How much time do you need for those?
Mr. Mayor, I keep saying Mr. Mayor, Mr. Vice Mayor, I'm sorry, I don't mean to say that. I apologize, yeah, sure.
We know he's full of ice.
I would say that for the wayfinding plan, we would need no less than 20 minutes.
Okay.
For the budget amendment, probably the same.
So there's 80 minutes right there.
That's what you've already got docketed, right? Yeah.
Anybody else from council want to add anything on there? We have 40 minutes already for the code of ethics discussion, and then a total of 40 minutes for these next two.
How much time does visit Casper you need?
They haven't come up with anything yet, have they?
Yeah, she was wanting to get in front of council.
Right, but she said that she would come to us with.
She said just make sure it wasn't on it.
Right, because do we have it on here?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, we put it on there.
I don't know how much time we'll have to find out from her. So I think she said that she wanted to be put on the list, and then she would come to us with a more specific time frame. That's what I remember her saying.
I think she said she wanted to get put on the list and then just make sure it didn't fall on a commission night.
Right. Well, their meetings are the same days as ours. Let me get a hold of her and find out exactly what she wants. She did talk about having someone come in her place if she happened to attend a meeting. So I'll give her a call. And then, if anything, we can squeeze her in if she needs to on the 13th, if everybody's okay with that.
Who is it?
Visit Casper Brook.
Oh,
Yeah.
gotcha.
Yeah. I don't remember a specific time date from her. Anybody else want to add anything to the 13th?
How much time are we on?
We have 40 minutes for the code of ethics and then a total of 40 for the staff items. Also an hour and a half. That's, yeah, hour and a half.
I could see the code of ethics easily surpassing 40 minutes. And so I
I do
think,
too.
even though it might look light, I don't think it is.
I think that's enough, what we have right now.
Everybody else okay with that, or do we want to add another one?
What about just adding one of the WAM videos, I guess? Because they're what, 10 minutes long?
We might be able to incorporate that into the code of ethics discussion if we need to, because they do have videos on ethics.
Oh, I thought we were going to too, or,
So I think that could be incorporated in that.
okay.
Is everybody okay with that? Then the code of ethics, the two staff suggested items, and if we need to add Visit Casper, we can add Visit Casper. I'll call her tonight, make sure.
Cool.
Okay. Good. Anything for legislative review?
No, sir.
Okay, so I guess we'll go around the table, start with you, Councilman Bates.
Nothing for me.
Councilman Lutz?
It can be just one thing tonight, and I think that it will tie into our code of ethics meeting, but just since it's so far away. I don't know how to say this like in a correct manner. Social media presence is more important than I think people might like to admit, and I'm not saying that it's because I'm young or that I'm not young, but young. But I think it really matters what you say and how you come across on social media. When somebody who is associated with a council member is saying all 8 council members, other than the one I'm associated with, flunked all their economics and mathematics courses, that's a problem. No matter what, that is now the perception to the public that one council member thinks the other 8 can't do simple math and economics, no matter what. And I'm sorry, but we have to be more careful. Like, social media is, every time we say something, it gets the other way and it goes wild on social media. So, if anything, we have to be controlling what we are saying and the people closest to us are saying, because it's already gonna go wild outside of our control. So, that would just be my, and I would like to bring it back up at Code of Ethics about how we handle ourselves on social media and those closest to us.
Bob?
I don't really have anything tonight, but I did want to comment on the parade, and I know we'll probably get a lot of feedback about it every time we change something we do, but I thought it went extremely well this morning, and I thought that the city's approach in using our own vehicles and county vehicles to block off intersections, it just, I'm not sure it eliminated the parking issues, but it really seemed to work well. And for a first time out running this route, I do know there were some people that didn't quite know where the route was, but I ran the route at 6:30 this morning, and there were people camped out.
Oh gosh.
So, 6:30. But I think, yeah. But I think it went pretty darn smooth. So thanks for all your efforts.
There's just a couple things. I wanted to thank John. He's incredibly, probably one of the top 5 lawyers in this town, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. I'm just not saying it. For the work that he does, the time that he puts in here at the city, and the effort that he puts in, and the time that he does for all of our ordinances and everything else. And so I just want to say that from this perspective, from a council member. Thank you, John, for your hard work, and it does not go unnoticed. And I know that can be frustrating at times, but that's definitely something that I want to give kudos to you, John. Thank you so much for everything. Thank you. The other thing is, yeah, I think that I've often said that social media can be a scourge, but it can also be a blessing in some ways. But social media certainly, I've come to the realization that at some points I've started just like watching more humor stuff than getting involved in the politics and the mire of it, and it is frustrating. And I would hope that we all take a moment and pause of what we do post on Facebook, the people that we know post things on Facebook, because no matter what ends up happening, we're human, and it can be incredibly hurtful when we say things about people that we don't even know. And I think that that's something that we need to continue to learn and grow from as individuals, as government officials, as just human beings who have compassion and souls and hearts, because can be incredibly hurtful when you read things about yourself and you try not to. So I hope we can be a little bit more conscious of that.
Just a couple of things. First, I really want to, Chief, I want to compliment you and your department. I thought you guys did a great job with the parade today. And I did not run the parade route, I walked it.
I drove my truck at 6:30.
But I really thought that the route was good, and I thought that using these vehicles was a good passive way of handling all those intersections and everything. There is one thing I want to sort of touch on a little bit. I'm really troubled by something that you folks all gave a thumbs up to here today. This issue of paying for these people's insurance premiums. I do not feel, and I don't think that I think that the city attorney's opinion backs me up, and I think that Mr. Henley's opinion was exactly spot on this. I don't think our staff did anything wrong in requiring that those people to get insurance. I think that was a very good reading of the parade permit requirements in use a legal term in parliamentary, which means reading them together to have this regulation and the ordinance read together so that they harmonize, to use Mr. Henley's words, but so that they work together and fit together. I think that the city staff did a very good job of that. If I felt for a minute that the staff had overstepped its boundaries or in any manner mistreated these people or anything, I would be the first person to say that we should go back and make them whole and pay for things. I think that by saying, oh, well, we're going to pay for this, that implies that the staff did something wrong, which I don't think that they did, and or it says, well, anytime if the city makes you do something, even if the city was right in making you do it, come back and ask us and we'll pay you for it. And I think that those are real bad precedents. I feel very strongly that the city staff handled that as good as they could. You know, I think that enacting this proposed ordinance that Mr. Henley has crafted together for us is a really good step, because a lot of these things I feel real strongly that people should be able to reasonably go and look in one place, oh, this is what I have to do, and know what they're supposed to do, instead of, well, I've got to go over here, then I got to go over there, and all that stuff. But I really am troubled by the precedent that I think that giving a thumbs up to that has set. Not that I'm unsympathetic to a lot of the concerns that these people have, but I think that's just a real bad precedent, and I'll be voting against that when it comes up for approving that as a bill, bills and payments.
Well, I stand beside my decision on that tonight, simply because of the fact that if we're going to a point of changing an ordinance so that we can understand it, then it couldn't be understood. So, so I don't think we're setting a precedence. We're not saying that city employees did anything, or city staff did anything wrong. So what we're simply saying, what I'm getting from this is that couldn't understand it, and we're having to change an ordinance so that we can understand it. So I have no problem paying the bill. So that's all I got.
Okay, anything else?
Nope.
All right,
Are you done with that?
yes, I think we're done. Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, everybody.
Oh, yeah.